right, good evening, everyone. My name is Xavier Duran. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for the Lisle Library District. A couple of things before we begin. We are in what's considered webinar mode, where only the webcam of myself and the presenter, as well as our mics, are the only ones that are enabled and active. That means that the only way that you can communicate with us is through the Q&A feature or the chat feature if you have any questions, any technical questions. However, if you have any questions about the program or as the program is going, please drop those into the Q&A. I'll go ahead and alert our wonderful presenter with the questions, and we will answer questions as the program is it's going as we're progressing through the program. We are in our winter read program now. You are more than welcome to join the winter read program at lisle.library.beanstack.com and register. For adults and teens, if you read 2 books, you get a nifty little travel-size tumbler, as well as your choice of decal of a snowman or a snowflake. With that said, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our wonderful presenter, Rick Graffagna of Senior Solutions.
Well, thank you very much, Xavier, and good evening, everybody. I appreciate you taking some time out of your busy, hopefully holiday planning period to join us tonight. Again, as mentioned, my name is Rick Graffagna, and my company is Senior Solutions. And, topic of tonight's presentation is Senior Housing 101. I really do encourage questions. If we were live and in person, it's a little easier to have that kind of back and forth of, exchange of questions and answers and ideas and such. But please use the Q&A, and, I will answer your questions as best as I can. So why don't we kind of get started? I guess before we jump into the meat of the topic, maybe have a little humorous story, or at least what I think is humorous. So there was this group of senior citizens that were on a bus trip. They were going on a little excursion, and they were on the road for a little bit, and one of the seniors approached the bus driver and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Do you like peanuts?" And he said, "Yeah, I really do like peanuts." And she said, "Okay, great. Well, reach out your hand, and I got some peanuts here for you." So he did, and he ate the peanuts down. She went back to her seat, and several minutes later, she approached the bus driver and tapped him on the shoulder and asked him again if he cared for some peanuts. And he said, "Sure." And so he ate the peanuts, and that repeated itself, 2 or 3 more times. And finally, the bus driver said, "I really appreciate the peanuts." He goes, "But I really, I don't want to eat all of your peanuts. I feel bad about that." And the woman said, "Well, that's okay, because the peanuts are too hard. They hurt our teeth. We really can't chew and eat the peanuts very well." And he goes, "Well, that's too bad, but why would you spend your good money on peanuts if you can't eat them?" And she said, "Well, we really enjoy the chocolate on the outside of the peanuts." And I'm sure you're home laughing hysterically right now, or hopefully. Anyway, let's move in. Retirement community financial models. So there are a couple of 3 different types of financial models out there for retirement housing. So the first is what we call buy-in. And if we're in person, I would be asking, for a show of hands, how many people may know what a buy-in is, and ask you to maybe explain that. But a buy-in type of community is one that's going to ask for a fairly significant upfront fee to gain access to that property. And when I say significant, it's going to be some level of a 6-figure number. It could be 200,000, it could be 300. I've seen as much as $500,000. Okay, and so that gains you access into that property and the various levels of care that they have, which I'll explain a little bit more further. So what do you get for your buy-in? A number of things potentially. First of all, you get to be a resident of the community. Second, you are able, in many cases, to have priority access to the other levels of care that are available in that community. In some cases, there is preferential or preferred pricing, if you will. for residents that came in on the buy-in, and as they progress with the other levels of care. In some cases, there's a life care plan or a safety net, which essentially says that if you live here and you start out as a buy-in, and at some point you're no longer able to pay the monthly fees because your financial assets have been exhausted, because of that benevolent fund or the life care plan, you can stay there, and that fund will pay for your ability to stay in that property. So what happens to that money that you put up front? Well, depending on the community that you moved in and the type of plan that you entered in, you may have either perhaps a 50 or a 70, 80 or 90% plan. And what that really means is that at the time of your departure from that property, that percentage of that upfront fee will either be returned to you or to your estate and your beneficiary. So for example, if it was a $200,000 buy-in amount and you had a 90% plan, $180,000 would then be released to you or to your estate. Okay, so that in kind of a simplified version, that's kind of what a buy-in community is. Next is what I call a community fee or rental type of senior housing. These are senior properties that have a much lower entry fee. Typically, it's a one-time only, non-refundable fee that's going to be in the neighborhood of $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000. It's rental from the standpoint that it really is kind of month to month. That if you give a certain number of days notice, you're able to be absolved of any further financial responsibilities. You may sign what looks to be like a 12-month lease, but the reality is in the state of Illinois, if you give a 30-day notice, your financial responsibilities come to an end and you can leave. So there's a lot more greater flexibility in these types of communities than in the buy-in community. And of the totality of senior housing that are out there that you might see, the vast majority of them are community fee versus buy-in. And then the third type of community is low income or affordable housing. These are typically independent living properties whose rents are below market rate, and so they cater to seniors that perhaps aren't in as strong a financial position as others. And there's either a voucher program or they're under the HUD Section 8 program. But in many cases, the rent is determined kind of as a percentage of the income that you have. One of the challenges with affordable housing is really supply. There's a limited inventory of this. Demand really is much greater than the availability, and oftentimes there's a waiting list, to gain access to these types of communities. Okay, so let's move on. And again, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to pop them into the Q&A button. So types of retirement housing. First is independent living. Okay, so independent living, as it's kind of defined here, is for seniors that are independent. They don't really have any care needs. They're come and go. They're probably still driving. In some cases, they may still have a full-time job or a part-time job. Your independent living apartment could be a 1-bedroom, could be a 2-bedroom. In some cases, even a 3-bedroom apartment. They come unfurnished. You furnish them with your own personal belongings. Comes with a full kitchen. Your base rent gets you a meal plan, which is served in a dining room setting in the community, but it's less than 3 meals a day, which is why you have a full kitchen. The meal plan might be 1 meal a day, could be 45 meals a month. It kind of depends on what the program is in that particular community. Your rent gets you a periodic housekeeping and maintenance and utilities, Wi-Fi, et cetera, is included. Oftentimes the landline phone might be an additional fee, gets you access to the whole community, any programming or activities, local transportation, and the like would be offered and part of the base rent. In some cases, the laundry, washer and dryer are located right in your apartment, or they would be on the same floor as your apartment, so easy access to have your laundry completed. Next is what, excuse me, what we call independent living with services. So in this particular case, let's say you've been independent, you're living in your independent apartment, and life throws you a curveball. Okay, let's say that you had a slip and fall, and now you're a little unsteady on your feet and not quite as confident stepping into and out of the shower. Or let's say you injured your shoulder and you're having a little trouble getting yourself dressed and undressed in the morning and at the end of the day. You can pay for services to come in and help with that specific item to keep you safe and to get that accomplished, to get you safely in and out of a shower, to get you safely, dressed and undressed. That might be an outside private caregiver that you enter into an agreement with to come in and take care of that. Again, there'd be an additional fee for that. Or it could be a caregiver provided by the property where you live to do that. And what they're going to basically address is, if you're not familiar, these are things called activities of daily living, or ADLs. So things like bathing, dressing, grooming, items of this are personal care type of items. And as long as the service that you need can be scheduled, then you can pretty much be appropriate to stay in your independent living apartment. If the totality of the help that you need gets to a point where you're never quite sure when you're going to need care, and you're never quite sure when you may push that safety pendant for help, or it's no longer schedulable, then maybe that IL apartment is no longer going to be appropriate, and we may need to transition to assisted living. So depending on the community that you're in, assisted living could be in the same building that you're at, could be a separate floor that's designated as assisted living, because assisted living is a separate licensure, license and with oversight by the state of Illinois. Could be a floor, like I mentioned, could be a wing, could be a separate building on the same property where assisted living is offered. Assisted living, again, is apartment style living. Could be a studio, could be a 1-bedroom, could be a 2-bedroom. Again, are unfurnished. You furnish it with your own personal belongings. It comes with a kitchenette versus a full kitchen. The kitchenette being a sink, a refrigerator, countertop, cabinets for storage, but not a full kitchen. And the reason that is that your base rent in assisted living includes 3 meals a day. All right. And it also includes the other items we spoke about before. So housekeeping and maintenance and 3 meals a day. It also includes laundry services. So laundry services are provided for the residents in assisted living. You've got local programming and activities and local transportation, typically within a X mile radius to take you for shopping excursions or events, or, for medical appointments, things of that nature. In assisted living buildings, and also in your independent living building, there are nurses on staff. Specifically in assisted living, the nurses primarily manage the caregivers and also the medication management program. There are doctors there that make rounds periodically, a gerontologist or audiologists, podiatrists in some cases, they're there to provide services. In assisted living, there's really 2 buckets to the cost equation. The first bucket is the cost of the rent. The second is the cost of care. And that care cost is determined after an assessment has been done of each resident in assisted living. and they really can put together a personal care plan that defines the totality of needs that you have in order to get through the day safely. I mentioned the activities of daily living. Perhaps you need just a little bit of help to get through the day, or maybe you've got significant issues in terms of lots of ADL support needs. There's some mobility issues, and maybe you need help getting navigating the building in a wheelchair, things of that nature. So there's two pieces to that cost. A potential third piece to that cost is if it's not an individual living in senior housing and it's a couple and they're living in the same apartment, then there's what we call a second person fee, which could range from $750, I've seen as high as $1,500. And that's really, in a sense, a cost of food rather, and also some oversight in assisted living. And there's something else I was going to say about that, and it just escaped me. But anyway, so there's a second person fee that's part of things as well. I'm assuming no questions at this point, Xavier?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll keep moving on. So another type of support in assisted living is what we call memory care. Okay, so memory care, again, depending on the property that you're in, could be a wing of the building, could be a separate floor that's been designated as memory care. There are standalone properties, which, that's all that they do. Their specialty is providing support for people with cognitive shortfalls and dementia, whether it's Lewy body or Alzheimer's or frontal lobal or vascular. There's a variety, a wide number of different types of dementia. So memory care settings in many cases, not many cases, are primarily differentiate themselves from assisted living in a number of ways. One is a secured environment, so that if a resident is a wander risk or is exit seeking, they're in a secured environment, so they can't get out and potentially get into an unsafe situation. The employees or caregivers that work in memory care have been specially trained to work with and manage people that have cognitive shortfalls. They're able to address and deal with behaviors and outbursts and things of that nature. The programming and the activities are geared towards people that have those shortfalls, and so the activities are different in memory care than what you'll see in assisted living. I oftentimes get asked the question from adult children, about their parents potentially, and they say, well, mom's been diagnosed with early onset, so we need to go to memory care. Well, not necessarily. Okay, there are many people that have dementia that are living very successfully in assisted living. It's only at some point, where perhaps they're no longer able to function readily and participate readily with the programming, the activities in assisted living, or if they are exit seeking or wandering, where they really need to go to memory care and be and receive the benefits of that type of housing and support. So apartments and memory care, again, a little different than assisted living and independent living. More typically, these are studio apartments, a little smaller. Some cases, their furnishings are provided, but in a lot of cases, families decorate and furnish with the residents' own belongings so there's some familiarity there. They're smaller because the residents are not in their apartment very much. There's really some strong encouragement and assertively, getting the resident out of the apartment to participate in activities, to try to keep them as busy as possible throughout the course of the day, stimulated, both, try to stimulate them physically and cognitively and emotionally, throughout the course of the day. So that's memory care. So some of you may have heard this term before, continuing care retirement communities, or CCRC. In senior housing, CCRCs have a tendency to be associated most with the buy-in type of senior property. And a CCRC is a community that typically offers, most, if not all, of the levels of care that someone might need. So that might include, so that includes independent living, assisted living, memory care, and even skilled nursing. And we're going to touch on skilled nursing here in a little bit. And so when I talked before about some of the one of the benefits of buying communities where you get preferential either access or perhaps priority pricing, you know, with the different levels of care in the community, this is really what I was speaking to, you know. So as you would transition from, you know, potentially independent living to assisted living and so on and so forth, you know, that's really what I was addressing. The other thing that I didn't mention was that in senior housing, you are able to have hospice services brought to you. And so in assisted living and in memory care, it truly can be an end of life solution for someone that you may not have to at the end stage of life, you know, leave your assisted living apartment and either go to another community for skilled nursing or go to the hospital for those last days. There's really hospice is great, and in terms of the support and the services that they offer, but you know, you really can, you know, stay there for the duration. So next is a type of senior housing that's unique to the state of Illinois. It's called supportive living. Supportive living, again, is senior housing. It's for seniors 65 years and up. They have their own, it's apartment style living. Again, could be a studio apartment, could be a 1-bedroom, unfurnished. There are kitchenettes. Very similar to the other type of housing we've spoken to. There's a base rent, which pays for 3 meals a day and housekeeping and maintenance and laundry and all of the things that we've touched on so far. There's care that's available to you in supportive living. Supportive living license falls one level below assisted living. So it's not true assisted living type of care. The residents that are living in supportive living need to be able to function within their apartment. They need to be able to stand and to pivot. And even if that's to get up from a chair to get to a walker or to a wheelchair, essentially they need to be able to navigate the apartment to get to the restroom to take care of their toileting needs. So that's kind of one of the distinctions with assisted living. It's not true 24/7 care. The care is similar to independent living with services. If that activity of daily living that you need help with can be scheduled and you have the mobility that I described, then you can live in supportive livings. So that's a little bit different than what we've spoken to before about assisted living. And the other big difference with supportive living is that unlike the other types of housing we talked about, independent living, assisted living, memory care, CCRCs, which are all private pay only, supportive living is a portal to, or you can transition to Medicaid, public aid, and have Medicaid pay for you to live in supportive living if you no longer had the financial resources to pay the monthly rent. Okay, so that's supportive living. Next, affordable senior housing. I touched on that before. Again, really short, great demand, short supply, rent that is below market rate. Typically, these are independent living buildings, 60 years on up. There may very limited services, if any. It is independent living housing with a full kitchen. You basically navigate and do things on your own. If you need a caregiver, you can hire a caregiver to have them come in to provide any help that you might need. And finally, skilled nursing, both for rehabilitation and long-term placement. Skilled nursing, again, could be as part of your CCRC, but most of your skilled nursing properties are standalone facilities. People go there for a couple, 3 different reasons. One being rehabilitation. Let's say you fell and you broke your hip. You were in the hospital, you had surgery, they repaired the hip, and then they send you to skilled nursing for some pretty intensive rehab, for up to 100 days, paid for by Medicare, which unfortunately these days you're not able to use those 100 days very often. but you're there for rehabilitation, and then you leave and go back to where your previous housing was. People are also in skilled nursing on a long-term basis, and they're there really for a couple of reasons. One might be financially. Let's say you no longer have the capacity to pay for supportive living or private pay senior housing. You can go to skilled nursing, a property that accepts Medicaid, and live in skilled nursing and have public aid, Medicaid pay for you to live there. Or in some cases, someone has the ability to pay privately, but the type and level of care that they have is no longer appropriate in assisted living. That's usually just a handful of maladies. So things like feeding tube, ventilator, a respirator, an IV antibiotics, 2 or 3 plus person assist. In those kinds of situations, you're not able to stay in assisted living and you need to transition over to skilled nursing. Okay, so let's keep moving. So as you're thinking about senior housing, there are some things to consider. One is location, right? I think, in my working with families, that if that's not the number one, it's the number 2 item, in terms of as someone is considering and looking for a senior housing option, location is important. And what's driving the location? It could be, you want to stay very close to where, you've been living for the last, multiple decades. You may be looking to relocate closer to family, so perhaps, you used to live in, you live in Lisle, but the kids have all moved up north, to maybe Long Grove or in that area. And now you want to get closer to them. Perhaps you transitioned away. Perhaps at some point you moved to Florida, and now life has thrown you a couple of curveballs, and you'd like to get back closer to family, and that safety network that's available, being close to family, so you relocate back closer to them. So location is always really important. Level of care, what are the health services that are available in the community that you're moving to? For there, you're kind of having to look down the road a little bit, and, to try to say, well, is assisted living appropriate? Do I need to have memory care as an option? Is there a history of dementia in the family? Has there already been a diagnosis of early onset dementia? And so you really should have a kind of a handle on what the various levels of care that are available in the community that you're considering. What do they do for fun? Lifestyle and amenities. This decision, you're looking to find your new home, and you want to stay busy, you want to stay active. And so what do they do? What kind of excursions they go on? What kind of programming activities do they have? Do you like to exercise? What kind of exercise equipment and facilities do they have in the building? Small number of properties have swimming pools. So perhaps you want to target, one that has a pool if that's something that you've always wanted to do or want to continue to do. Cost obviously is always a factor, right? And so it's really, it's important for you to not only understand what the current cost is going to look like for you based off of your current situation, but what might it look like down the road? If you're independent living today and several years from now it's assisted living, you should at least maybe have an idea of what assisted living costs today, what's a base rent for the apartment, what's the variety of cost of care kind of look like. So from a budgeting standpoint, you can kind of have an idea of what that looks like. So if we were in person, I'd ask you to raise your hand and say, hey, who enjoys food? So I'm raising my hand for myself. So food is an important component to the decision. And quite honestly, folks, the food in senior housing is pretty good. It's prepared on site. It's virtually 100% cooked from scratch. The menus change over time. They really listen to their residents in terms of feedback about the not only just the quality of the food, but the different types of food that's available. It's served restaurant style with a menu. over the years, I've had a number of opportunities to eat in senior housing, and I wouldn't kid you, the food is good. I kind of touched on this already, in terms of what they do for fun, activities, outings. Maybe you're not driving anymore. Maybe you don't have a car. And so understanding what local transportation looks like, what's the geography and how far away are they going to go? Is there routine transportation? So is Tuesdays Target days and Thursdays Dollar General Day? And are there a couple of days available for medical appointments? And how does that whole process work? I know for some families, if their loved one needs routine dialysis multiple times through the week, trying to understand whether the community can provide that kind of service, or they need to go in and find that themselves. These are all, important things to know. Always important to ask about the staff, staff types, what's the caregiver to resident ratio? There may be a difference between assisted living and memory care. How long has the staff been in place? What's the tenure look like for the key team members, like the directors of memory care, directors of assisted living? How long has the executive director been in place? Are they able to provide are all the employees and are all the caregivers actual employees of the property, or have they had to rely on outside staffing agencies to keep their staffing levels at an appropriate level to support their residents? In all honesty, most buildings hiring and staffing is a challenge. It's all over the news. In terms of hitting many industries, and the senior housing industry is not immune to that. Okay, so that's a challenge for everybody. Buildings and grounds, when you first approach a building and you're pulling into the parking lot, I tell families that's really when the tour is started. Is it well kept? In the winter, is the snow removed well and the ice taken care of? In nicer weather, is it well landscaped and clean? Is it inviting as you walk into the building? What do the common areas look like? Have they been recently painted? What's the carpeting? Is it in good shape? Is it well lit? Things of that nature, which is an indicator of their pride in their property, and that they're willing to maintain that and keep it very nice for the resident, because this is your home, okay, and you want to have your home be as nice as possible. Oh, goody, look at I put food in there twice. I wonder how that got in there. Well, anyway, so food is important. I remember I was working with a woman about 5 years ago now, and her name was Dorothy, and Dorothy was 95 at the time, and we were about to go out and visit some communities, and she asked me, she said, "Rick, so how's the food in these places?" And I said, well, Dorothy, why do you ask? And she said, well, when you're 95, you don't have much else to look forward to, so the food really needs to be good. So I told her that the food is really good, and that she didn't need to worry about that. Security and safety, what does that look like in the building? When do the front doors get locked? Is there a concierge or a receptionist in place? What are their hours? If you want to come and visit the property after hours, how do you gain access to that? What kind of safety protocols are in place? Do they do routine drills, for fire or hazardous weather? I almost said hurricane. We don't have a problem with hurricanes, but tornadoes and things of that nature. Goodness knows the recent news from last weekend was so devastating. But so do people know what to do in the case of an emergency? And then future needs. All of us our age, life throws us curveballs, and so things change. And so what you want to do is, with this first step, especially if you're coming from a home that perhaps you've lived in for 40, 50, 60 years, you want to hopefully make the best decision that's going to last the longest, if not all the way through the end of life. And so that, does this place have going to be able to accommodate your potential needs, for down the road? Okay. Oh,
One question that we did have was
sure.
explaining the services your company offers with regards to all of this.
Oh, sure, absolutely. You know what? And that I will address that towards the end of the presentation. I appreciate the question. Um, so a lot of times I'll have adult children ask me, well, gee, when is it time to move? Okay, we're thinking that things are moving along, and we may want to, think about doing something. And there's no easy answer to that question. It varies by family and by situation. It really becomes a very, kind of a personal situation. I could talk for a couple of hours about all the different stories that I've run into over the years, but it will be change, and it different things are different things are more important to different families. Okay, and so that's why it's never quite the same, and it's going to vary based off situation. Is mom and or dad very local and it's easy to provide help to them, and so maybe you can push off a decision versus mom and dad are living 2,000 miles away and it's become very difficult and challenging to support their needs, and so now maybe you need to move earlier versus later. um uh, Safety, I put this in bold. This is always the driving factor. Okay, if as an adult child, I tell families that if you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're not quite sure and you're wondering if dad was able to get up okay through the night and get to the restroom and get back to bed without slipping and falling, because he's fallen in the past, that may be one of the reasons to start thinking more strongly about wanting to make a change. But safety is certainly an important ingredient. I kind of touched on it just now, family geography. If just trying to get mom and or dad closer to that support network, that could be what drives a move. And then cost. Okay, we're going to touch base a little bit later about home care and and using a private duty caregiver to keep mom or dad at home as long as possible, which I am a strong component of. Personally, my mom is 92 and she's still in the original house, and knock on wood, things are still going well for her. But sometimes keeping someone at home is a great goal, but that cost of that home care can become kind of pricey, and in some cases the cost of that home care giver could be more than what assisted living costs. And so there's different pros and cons to that argument. And I won't get into that with you right now, but sometimes cost is part of that decision process. Oh, senior housing today. Certainly much different today than we were a year ago. Thank goodness for the vaccine and the fact that we are all, hopefully, have gotten our 2 shots and have our boosters. And, even though we're not 100% immune, we're in much better position today than we were a year ago. So communities are open for business. You can tour without virtually any restrictions at this point. Used to be not too many months ago, excuse me, that they were limiting the number of family members that could come in and visit, but that's pretty much much more wide open at this stage. The assessment process, which I indicated earlier, in terms of determining level of care, that's being done face to face, but can also be done virtually. Not only locally virtually, but if your parents are down in Florida and you're looking to have them move up, the north, there can be a virtual assessment done to try to determine what their needs are and if they're going to be appropriate to move into a community. Move-ins, there's some protocols is not quite as wide open as it used to be, but there used to be limitations on the number of people they would allow to come in and help move, mom and or dad into their apartment. Those restrictions have been pretty much relaxed at this point. Really, I should probably even eliminate this from my slide. I mean, the days of having to be isolated when either you've left the property for a period of time or you're a new resident, those days are virtually gone at this point. family visitations are now pretty normal. You can have pretty much free reign to the buildings, minimal limitations, if any, for the number of visitors. Employee and resident health continues to be monitored. And for a new resident, one of the entry requirements is going to be, that you've been vaccinated and that a very recent COVID test has come back negative before you're going to be allowed back in the build to move in. Activities and group dining is pretty much back to normal. There may be some social distancing that takes place with activities, but at least everybody's together. We went many months where meals were being brought from the dining room to residents' apartments. Activities were kind of being done in hallways, and it just was not a great situation. But that's much better. Kind of mentioned this already. And I wish I could say that everything as we stand now is going to be the same in 3 months, but we need to be flexible. There's a little bit of a resurgence taking place now with the numbers, and I don't think we're ever going to go back 100% to where we were at, but there may have to be some mitigating steps taken in order to keep everybody safe. So in senior housing, what types of payments are accepted? Private pay, Medicaid and Public Aid. If we were all face-to-face, this would be the time for my quiz. I've mentioned 2 different options where Medicaid Public Aid comes in to be the payer. In the state of Illinois, the first option is supportive living, which we spoke about earlier. And the second option would be a skilled nursing facility that accepts Medicaid. Medicare, a lot of times families will ask me, does Medicare help pay for senior housing? Unfortunately, it does not. The role that Medicare plays for you today, if you're living in your home and then you transition into senior housing, remains the same. You keep Medicare. It pays for any hospitalization, doctor's visits, rehabilitation, prescription drugs. That your Medicare comes with you and stays with you and continues to pay for the same things. So how do I go about funding these payments? Depending on your circumstances, Social Security income. If you were fortunate enough to work with for a company that provided a pension, take access to that. If you've been in a position to, some money aside and have some investments, now's the time to use that. I know a lot of times seniors want to, keep that money aside and hopefully, part of their legacy to leave some money for their family members. And I think that's beautiful if you're in a position to do that. But, you also need to think about yourself, and if being in senior housing is a better option for you to use some of those monies. A funny story, I was working with a gentleman about 3 years ago. He lived in Elmhurst, lived in a modest house. I was there visiting with him, and I brought an associate with me, and we were just conversing about what he wanted to do, and he was thinking about moving up to Huntley to be closer to his daughter. And so the woman that was with me, for whatever reason, to be very inquisitive about his financial situation. So, so wanted to find out, how much the house was worth. And he said, oh, it's about worth, about $300,000. It's fully paid for, no mortgage, and come to find out that he had a pretty healthy pension and Social Security, so his monthly income was about $4,200. Had a Cadillac long-term care insurance policy, one of the best that I had seen. And then she asked and said, so by any chance you have any savings or money set aside? And he goes, yeah, I've been pretty fortunate, I do. And she said, well, ballpark about how much do you have? And he goes, well, I have about $2.7 million, set aside. And so she goes, wow, are you lucky? And he looked at her, stone cold face and said, luck had nothing to do with it. So if you were fortunate enough I do not have $2.7 million set aside, in all honesty. So he was very smart and frugal and was able to set aside a significant amount of money for himself. Home that you're living in, that you've worked hard to pay for, and you've paid off the mortgage, the proceeds from your from your home can go a long way to help pay for senior housing. And right now, the market still is hot. I don't think it's as hot as it was 6 months ago, but people are getting premium prices for their home. I mentioned briefly, with the example I was telling you with the gentleman and Helmer's, but long-term care insurance. If there's 10 or 12 people on the call today, maybe one or two of you has a long-term care policy. That's my experience in terms of the percentage. So not a lot of people have long-term care, but senior housing accepts long-term care insurance. If you have a policy, fabulous. If you haven't looked at it for a long time to understand what the terms are and what the triggers are to initiate the long-term care policy, you may want to just pick that, go find your policy and ask that question. If you're an adult child on the phone and you're in a position to explore long-term care insurance before you get too advanced in age, now would be the time to do that. Because as we get older, quite obviously the cost of long-term care, does increase. If you're a military veteran, if you're a spouse having married a military veteran who served during a time of war, there may be some benefits for you. There's one benefit called aid and attendance for the actual veteran themselves. If you need some home care assistance, you could be eligible for up to 12 hours a week, paid for by the VA. Lines of credit and bridge loans, if the money that you need to pay for senior housing is tied up in your home and the home hasn't sold, there are ways of accessing that equity. I'm not an insurance broker, but I know that there in some cases, if you have a whole life policy and you've accumulated a cash value, that there may be some convertibility of those monies into a version of a long-term care policy. So, that might be, if you do have that kind of a policy, you may want to ask your insurance agent or broker, if they know more about that. Then the kids, I don't know about your situation. In my own personal situation, my children will not be in a position to support me and my wife in our retirement and senior housing years. But if you do have kids that have made it, that have hit it big, maybe they can help. Oh, other items of importance. Mentioned veterans benefits just now. A lot of times people, don't take advantage of that. The VA can be a wonderful option, not only for benefits, but also for providing medical care. And so, if you are a veteran, I would encourage you to try to explore, the different options that are available to you. Depending on your situation, you may need some guidance by an elder law attorney, whether that's for estate planning or for Medicaid or planning. Elder law attorney can be, someone that specializes working with seniors, could be a real help. I universally ask the families that I'm working with if, power of attorney and healthcare directives are in place. I'm always surprised, by the number of times that is not the case, and that, mom and dad are both 85 and there's no power of attorney in place. And so that's an important document. Actually, there's two documents. There's a power of attorney for healthcare. There's a power of attorney for property. They're only in effect while someone is alive. Okay. And so it's important to get those in place while someone still has the cognitive capacity to sign an agreement for power of attorney. Because if you've been, if you're on that power of attorney, like for your parents, and they no longer have capacity to make good decisions on their part, it defers to you in order to make some of those, potentially difficult decisions. You living in a house, needs to be sold. If you don't happen to know a realtor, there are a lot of great real estate services out there. Who's got stuff? Everybody raise your hand. Who's got stuff at home? I know I do. If you can look in the background, I'm talking to you from my basement home office tonight. You can see some stuff. But there are some wonderful companies out there that can help. If you don't have the capacity or the willpower to get through the stuff, from a downsizing or moving and packing, because you're not going to be able to take everything with you. Where when you transition to senior housing, you're going to it's apartment style living. It's great, but you're not going to get a 2,500 square foot house worth of belongings in it. So the stuff's going to have to go somewhere. So there's help out there. I mentioned in-home care. Hey, I strongly believe in people staying at home as long as possible, and there's some wonderful licensed agencies that can provide in-home care. So kind of how it works, these caregivers are the employees of these licensed agencies, licensed by the state of Illinois. As employees, they've been trained, they've been background checked, they've got appropriate insurance taken out on them, general liability, workers' compensation, and the like. So as the employer of these caregivers, as they come into your home, you're protected from a liability standpoint. They can help with your ADLs. They can help with bathing, dressing, grooming, medication reminders, mobility support, anything that's non-medical. Okay, so they can't do things like take blood pressure or draw blood or take a temperature or provide therapy or things of that nature. But short of those kinds of things, they can help quite a bit. They can do things like just basic companionship. They can run errands. They can do light housekeeping. They can do shopping. They can do meal preparation. So you can kind of cobble together the list of things that you want them to do based off of what the need is. And you can have them for shifts. The help may be needed 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours at the end of the day. Maybe there's more help, or maybe you only need help to come in 2 or 3 times a week. They're paid on an hourly basis for that shift work. If the needs are way more extensive and you really need more like someone in the home 24/7, that's a possibility as well. You can have a live-in caregiver. Some of the requirements for a live-in is that there's a bedroom available for them so they can sleep at night. The senior that they're providing care for pretty much needs to be able to get through the night without needing any assistance, so that caregiver can sleep. So if those 2 boxes have been checked, the pricing for a 24/7 caregiver is different. It's not based on an hourly basis. There's a day rate, okay, which makes it, it's still expensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as if you had to pay an hourly rate for 24 hours. Then there's adult day services out there. Here in our area, there's a couple of 3 wonderful options that let's say one of your parents is living with you, and you want to keep them active through the course of the day, or you go to work, and you can take them to an adult day service program. It's going to be safe. They're going to get lunch. There's going to be programming and activities, and these can be a great option, which I think a lot of people have a tendency to either forget about or don't even know that they exist. So let's keep going. There's 1 or 2 more slides, folks. So how do you go about locating these communities? I'm about to get to the question that was asked earlier. So you can do the looking. You can do the looking yourself. You could rely on family and friends and their inputs. There's a thing called Google, which you may be familiar with, where you can just get on the internet and do some basic research. As you do your research, there's some senior-related websites out there to help. There's some online senior placement agencies that can provide help in terms of locating senior housing communities. And then there's some local senior placement companies, like the company that I own and operate, Senior Solutions. So, I'll do a 30-second commercial here about, what I do and how I work. So I've been doing this for about 10 years. This is my own company. In the simplest way of looking at it, I'm a matchmaker. Okay, I try to connect, once I find out what the scenario is, I try to connect families with senior housing or the resources that they need that make the most sense based off of what their circumstances are, from things like I've already spoken to, like location and what's the budget look like and what's the level of care that is needed in. And I try to connect families to those options that make the most sense. I'll help schedule tours. I accompany families on the tours to make sure all the right questions get asked and answered. My services are free, so there's no cost to you. My compensation comes on a referral basis. So I work with the vast majority of the senior housing options in our area. And so, they would compensate me if I, for having someone move in that I recommended or referred. And hopefully I answered that person's question from earlier with that explanation. So again, this is my company name. This is my phone number and my email and my website. I would encourage you to go to my website, jot that down if you want. There's some, I've put together some videos kind of explaining in a little bit more detail, about senior housing. If you want to know a little bit more about me, there's some testimonials out there that some of my past families have been gracious enough to send to me. So that's kind of the conclusion of the presentation. I really appreciate everybody taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us this evening. So are there any questions that I can ask? And let me just say this. You know what? If you just jot my phone number down. I'm not an ambulance chaser. If you have just some questions, you just want to talk out loud about your situation, feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to listen, happy to help you however I can. Okay. So any questions out there?
One question that I just received is any resources for adult children of aging parents who are not safe but resistant to move?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? I'm not a professional counselor, but I have gone down this path many times with my family, so I can be a good starting point. But the longer answer to your question is yes, there are some companies out there that can provide some service for some guidance and even getting into arbitration, if it got to that point. So yes, so it's not easy. I understand, and way more often than not, there's some resistance, in terms of, the senior wanting to make that change. And in many cases, it's because they don't know. They don't know that senior housing is apartment style living with wonderful amenities and lots of activities and programming. And it's just a foreign concept to them, versus maybe what their experience has been that, maybe they're going, maybe they're in the past, maybe their loved ones went to maybe a not so nice skilled nursing facility, towards the end of their life. But I'm happy to listen to your scenario and give you the wisdom that I've been able to accumulate over the last 9 or 10 years. Good question. Thank you. So is that about it, Xavier?
Yeah, that's all the questions that we have. I will say that someone at the very beginning did type in LOL after your chocolate peanut joke.
Well, that I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
We're just getting a bunch of thank you, very informative presentation. So yeah.
Well, great. I love doing this. I love sharing the knowledge and information I've accumulated over the years. And, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but, and by the way, I am local. This is Lisle Public Library that's sponsoring me, and I do live in Lisle, so I'm very close. And so we might be neighbors. You never know, but I'm happy to listen and hear your story and see how I can help. And I want to thank the library for allowing me to do this. I really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick, for your wonderful expertise in senior living and then Senior Housing 101. This program will be available soon. Just watch out for our social media when we post this video. And once again, thank you so much, Rick Graffagna of Senior Solutions, for all of tonight's information. And thank you to everyone.